Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. They always say the first 24 hours of any disaster are the most dangerous. That if you can make it through those, your chances of survival go up. I never thought I'd have to put that theory to the test, but here I am, a fugitive, a survivor, and the world as I knew it, gone. 12 hours ago, I was just another man on the run, not from monsters, at least not the kind that used to be human. I had my own problems, the kind that wear badges and don't take kindly to people like me. I won't pretend I was innocent, but I wasn't the worst guy out there either. I made some mistakes, the kind that land you in a cell with no way out, except I found one. And now, I wish I hadn't. I was still in my orange jumpsuit when it started, a routine transfer from one facility to another. Handcuffed in the back of a van, flanked by two officers who weren't feeling particularly chatty. The road was long, empty stretches of asphalt cutting through a dense forest. No signs of civilization, no place to run even if I could. Then came the crash. It was sudden, like the universe slammed a fist down on the chessboard. The van swerved violently. I barely had time to process what was happening before we flipped. The world turned into a blur of motion, metal twisting, glass shattering. My head bounced off the side panel and everything went black. When I came to, I was upside down. Blood dripped from my forehead. The officer in the driver's seat wasn't moving. The other one groaned, trying to reach for his radio with a hand bent at an unnatural angle. That's when I heard it. A low, wet gurgle. Something moving outside the wreckage. The crunch of feet on gravel. At first, I thought it was just some unlucky person who stopped to help. Then I saw the face pressing up against the shattered window. Pale, slack-jawed. Eyes that didn't seem to see but still locked onto me with an awful, hungry intent. I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe the impact had rattled my brain too much. But then it opened its mouth. Too wide, impossibly wide, and let out a sound I'll never forget. The officer beside me screamed. Not in anger, not in pain, but in pure terror. He fumbled for his gun with shaking fingers, but before he could do anything, the thing outside lunged. The glass exploded inward, a spray of shards. Then came the hands, gray and cold, pulling, grasping. The officer fired once, twice. The thing didn't even flinch. I turned away as the screaming turned wet. That was the first time I saw one of them. The first time I realized that whatever had just happened to the world was bigger than my problems. Bigger than the law. Bigger than anything I'd ever faced before. And it was only the beginning. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to be afraid. Instinct took over. The officer's screams turned into wet gurgles, then stopped altogether. The thing outside was still tearing into him, oblivious to me. But I wasn't going to wait for it to notice. My hands were still cuffed in front of me, but I managed to push myself upright in the wreckage. The van was on its side, the back doors bent and barely holding onto their hinges. I kicked at them with everything I had, ignoring the pounding in my skull. On the third kick, they gave way. I crawled out into the open air, glass crunching under my palms. My vision blurred for a moment, but I shook it off. The forest surrounded me on all sides, dark, endless trees stretching up into the sky. The only light came from the moon, a pale glow filtering through the branches. I didn't know where I was, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Behind me, the thing was still feasting. The wet sounds of tearing flesh made bile rise in my throat. I forced myself to move. The ground was uneven, covered in leaves and jagged rocks that bit into my bare feet, but I didn't stop. I had no shoes, no weapons, no plan. Just an orange jumpsuit, a splitting headache, and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I stumbled through the trees, branches slashing at my arms. Every rustling leaf made me flinch. I didn't know how many of those things were out there. I didn't want to find out. Then I heard something else. Not the mindless gurgling of whatever had attacked the van. Something more familiar. Engines. I dropped to the ground, pressing myself against the dirt. Through the trees, I saw them. 2 black SUVs moving slowly down the road, their headlights sweeping across the wreckage. Not cops. I knew law enforcement vehicles well enough to recognize that these weren't them. No sirens, no markings. Just sleek armored cars rolling in like sharks through water. And then I saw the people stepping out. They were dressed in all black, tactical gear, helmets, rifles slung across their shoulders. Military, maybe, but something felt off. They moved too carefully, their weapons raised like they expected trouble, like they already knew what was out here. I held my breath, watching as one of them knelt beside the officer's body. He didn't flinch at the sight of the mess, just muttered something into a radio. Then he shot the body twice. I bit down on my tongue to keep from making a sound. Whoever these people were, they weren't here to help. The others moved methodically, sweeping the area with their rifles. One of them stopped near the trees, his light cutting through the darkness just feet from where I lay. I pressed myself flatter against the ground, barely daring to breathe. Then, from the wreckage, that awful gurgling sound came again. The thing was still moving. The soldier turned, raised his rifle, and fired. A single shot. A dull thud as the body hit the ground. Silence. Then, into his radio, he said something that made my blood run cold. Specimen neutralized, area not secure, possible containment breach. I didn't know what that meant. Not fully, but I knew one thing. This wasn't an accident. Whatever was happening, they knew. And that meant I had 2 threats to worry about now. The monsters, and the people hunting them. I stayed completely still, barely even breathing. The soldier stood just a few feet away, scanning the trees with his flashlight. I could hear the rustling of leaves under his boots, the soft crackle of his radio. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I knew better. The moment I moved, I'd be dead. Or worse. I had no idea who these people were, but they had the kind of efficiency that only came with serious training. No hesitation, no wasted movement, and they had just executed a dying cop without a second thought. I wasn't about to find out what they'd do to a fugitive who'd seen too much. The seconds stretched into an eternity. I felt every heartbeat slam against my ribs as I pressed myself into the cold earth, hoping the darkness would keep me hidden. Then finally, clear. The soldier's voice was sharp, emotionless. He turned away, moving back toward the wreckage. I let out a slow, silent breath. From my position, I could still see them, 5 figures moving with mechanical precision. One of them knelt near the thing they had just shot. It wasn't moving anymore, but even in the dim light, I could see that the bullet hadn't just killed it. It had blown a chunk of its head clean off. Headshots only, one of them said. It's spreading faster than expected. Spreading. That word sent a new kind of fear through me. This wasn't just some freak accident, some lone monster in the woods. It was bigger than that. The soldier with the radio spoke again. Orders? A long pause, then a curt nod. Understood. He turned to the others. "We move east. Cleanup crew will handle the site." Cleanup crew. I didn't like the sound of that. The soldiers piled back into their vehicles, engines humming to life. Within seconds, they were gone, swallowed by the darkness. But I wasn't stupid. They might be leaving, but I had no doubt someone else would be coming soon. I needed to get as far from this place as possible. There was only one problem. I was still cuffed. My wrists ached, rubbed raw by the metal, but I couldn't waste time worrying about that. First, I needed something, anything, I could use to break them. I scanned the forest floor, but all I saw were twigs and dirt. I turned my eyes back to the wreckage. The cop's body was still slumped over, his belt barely visible in the moonlight. I didn't want to do it, but I didn't have a choice. I moved fast, crawling back toward the wreckage, my heart hammering in my chest. The air smelled like blood and gasoline, thick and nauseating. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat as I reached for the officer's belt. "Keys! Come on, where are the keys?" My fingers fumbled over pouches, a holster. Then, finally, cold metal. I pulled the keyring free and worked fast, my hands shaking. It took 3 tries, but finally, the cuffs popped open. The relief was immediate. I flexed my fingers, rubbing at the sore skin. I wasn't free yet, but at least I could run. I grabbed the cop's gun, only half loaded but better than nothing. No extra ammo, no radio, but I'd take what I could get. Then, just as I was about to back away, I heard something. A rustling. Not from the wreckage, from the trees. Slow, shuffling. Breaths that weren't quite right. I turned my head, heart slamming against my ribs. The trees weren't empty anymore. Shapes moved between the trunks, pale, unsteady, eyes gleaming dully in the darkness. Not just one, not just 2. More. I had spent so much time hiding from the soldiers that I hadn't realized the real danger had found me. I wasn't alone in the woods anymore. And whatever was out there, it had caught my scent. I didn't move. My grip tightened around the half-loaded pistol, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. There were too many of them. Shadows shifted between the trees, slow and unsteady, but I wasn't fooled. They had seen me. They were coming. I took a shaky step back, eyes darting for an escape route. Running on open road would make me an easy target, and the wreckage behind me was a death trap. That left only one choice. The forest. I turned and ran. Branches tore at my arms. The ground was uneven, covered in roots waiting to trip me, but I didn't stop. My bare feet pounded against the earth, lungs burning. Behind me, the things followed. I could hear them. Rustling leaves, snapping twigs. The guttural, wet sounds of something trying to breathe through broken throats. And worse, they were getting faster. I had made a mistake. When I first saw them, they were shuffling, sluggish. But the moment I ran, it was like flipping a switch. I heard them snarl, their movements shifting from mindless stumbling to something more predatory. They were hunting me. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Eyes. Too many. Pale faces catching moonlight through the branches. Closer than before. I forced myself to run faster, my legs screaming in protest. The trees blurred past, my lungs heaving, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I was dead. Then, up ahead, I saw it. A structure. Not a house. Something smaller, older. A hunting cabin, maybe. I didn't care. It had walls. A door, a chance. I pushed myself harder. The moment I reached the porch, I nearly collapsed against the door. My hands fumbled for the handle, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The door swung open and I threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. Darkness swallowed me whole. I stumbled backward, gasping for breath. The only light came from thin slivers of moonlight through boarded-up windows. The air inside was thick, stale, like the place hadn't been touched in years. But I had no time to think. Outside, the sounds grew louder. The shuffling turned to scratching. Clawed fingers raked against the wood. Low, gurgling moans pressed against the walls. I backed away from the door, gripping the pistol so tightly my knuckles turned white. They knew I was in here. And they weren't leaving. The scratching at the door didn't stop. I stood frozen in the dark, every muscle locked, every breath shallow. The wooden walls around me groaned under the weight of something pressing against them. I wasn't safe. This cabin might have given me a few seconds of breathing room, but it wouldn't hold forever. A loud thud against the door made me jump. The pistol in my hands felt heavier than before. I had 4 bullets left. 4 bullets. And from the sounds outside, a whole lot more than 4 of them, I needed a plan. I turned, forcing my eyes to adjust to the darkness. The place was small. 1 room, a few broken pieces of furniture, a rotting table in the center. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like forgotten curtains. Then I saw it. A shotgun. It was propped up against the far wall, next to an old hunting pack. I moved fast, nearly tripping over the broken floorboards in my rush. My hands snatched up the weapon, but the second I touched it, my stomach dropped. The weight was wrong. Empty. I yanked open the pack, fingers digging through dust-covered supplies. Ripped cloth. Old cans of food, a hunting knife. No ammo. I bit back a curse. I wasn't getting out of this with firepower alone. Another thud at the door. The wood splintered. A low growl vibrated through the walls. I gripped the shotgun anyway. An empty weapon was still a weapon. Then my eyes landed on something else. A hatch. Near the far corner of the cabin, half covered by an old rug. My heart leapt. A way out. I rushed toward it, dropping to my knees. My fingers curled around the edges of the wood, pulling hard. It groaned in protest, stiff from years of neglect, but after a few tries, crack. It popped open, revealing a dark crawlspace below. Cold air rushed up to meet me, carrying the scent of damp earth. A root cellar. It wasn't ideal, but right now, it was my only shot. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the hunting knife from the pack, shoved the pistol into my waistband and lowered myself into the darkness. The second my feet hit the dirt below, I reached up and pulled the hatch closed. Darkness swallowed me whole. Above me, the door finally gave way. The things outside poured in. I held my breath, pressing myself against the damp wall of the cellar. My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. Heavy footsteps dragging across wood, low, guttural breaths. They were inside, and I was trapped beneath them. I couldn't breathe. The cellar was pitch black, the air thick with damp rot. My back was pressed against the cold dirt wall, my hands gripping the shotgun and knife like they were my last lifeline. Above me, the cabin creaked under shifting weight. They were inside. Their footsteps dragged across the floor, slow and uneven. The wet sounds of their breathing filled the space, heavy and unnatural. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay still. If they heard me, a loud crack made me flinch. Something heavy slammed into the ground, sending dust trickling down from the wooden boards above. I swallowed hard. I needed a way out. Slowly, carefully, I crouched lower and ran my fingers along the dirt walls. If this was a root cellar, there had to be another way to the surface, An old tunnel maybe, or a door that had been buried over time. My fingers brushed against something. Wood, a board, half rotted and loose. My pulse quickened. I dug my fingers under the edge and pulled. The damp earth made it heavy, but it shifted, crumbling slightly. Above me, one of the creatures let out a wet, rasping snarl. I froze. The footsteps changed direction, moved toward the hatch. They knew. I gritted my teeth and pulled harder. The board came loose with a dull snap. Dirt spilled over my hands, revealing a narrow gap. A passage barely big enough to squeeze through. I didn't have a choice. I pushed myself inside, stomach scraping against the rough edges as I dragged myself forward. The tunnel was tight, the air thick with the smell of old earth and decay. My fingers clawed at the dirt, pulling myself inch by inch into the darkness. Behind me, the hatch exploded open. A deafening shriek echoed through the cellar. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I forced myself forward, my lungs burning. The tunnel twisted, then suddenly dipped downward. My body lurched forward, sliding down a steep incline. I hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my side, but I scrambled to my feet. The passage had opened into a larger space, a cavern, maybe an old storage area. Wooden beams lined the walls, half collapsed with age. A faint light flickered from somewhere ahead. An exit. I didn't think, I ran. The sound of splintering wood roared behind me. They were coming. I sprinted toward the light, feet pounding against uneven ground. The passage narrowed, then opened into the night air. Cold wind slapped against my face. I had made it outside. But I wasn't safe yet, because standing in the clearing, guns raised, eyes locked on me, were the soldiers. And they weren't here to rescue me. I skidded to a stop, chest heaving. The soldiers stood in a tight formation, rifles locked onto me. Their black armor made them look less like people and more like machines, cold, calculated, unshaken by what they'd just seen. Behind me, the shrieks of the creatures echoed from the tunnel. I was trapped. I raised my hands, still gripping the empty shotgun. Wait. A red dot landed on my chest. Down, now. The voice was sharp, commanding. I wasn't stupid. I dropped to my knees, setting the shotgun down. My fingers twitched toward the pistol in my waistband, but I knew how that would end. One of them stepped forward. Unlike the others, he wasn't wearing a helmet. His face was sharp, scarred, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. He studied me, head tilted slightly. "Did you come from the house?" I hesitated. He already knew the answer. "Yes," I said finally. His expression didn't change. "Were you bitten?" "No." Silence stretched between us. He gave a slight nod. "Take him." Before I could react, rough hands grabbed me from behind, shoving me face down into the dirt. A knee pressed into my back, pinning me. Cold metal snapped around my wrists, cuffs, but not police-issued. Tighter, heavier. These weren't meant to hold prisoners. They were meant to hold something else. I gritted my teeth. "Look, I don't know who you are, but if you leave me here, you're gonna have bigger problems." The scarred man crouched beside me. "We already have problems." The creatures shrieked louder, bursting from the tunnel. The soldiers moved instantly. No hesitation, no panic. Gunfire exploded through the clearing. I barely turned my head in time to see them drop one by one. The creatures staggered forward, but the soldiers were faster. Bullets punched through skulls with sharp, wet cracks. Bodies hit the ground in twitching heaps. It was over in seconds. The scarred man exhaled, lowering his rifle. Clear. I swallowed hard. These things, these monsters, had chased me through the woods, hunted me like an animal, and these soldiers had just handled them like it was nothing. Like they'd done it before. The man turned back to me. "Get him up." Rough hands hauled me to my feet. "Where are you taking me?" I demanded. The scarred man didn't answer. He just turned away. And as they shoved me toward one of the waiting SUVs, one thought burned through my mind. I had survived the monsters. But something told me I wasn't going to survive them. The cuffs bit into my wrists as they shoved me into the back of the SUV. The door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The interior smelled like oil and metal, sterile and suffocating. There were no handles on the doors, no way to escape, just cold steel and the quiet hum of the engine. Outside, the soldiers moved quickly, checking bodies, burning the ones that still twitched. The creatures didn't scream as the flames swallowed them. They just stopped like puppets with their strings cut. I turned my head. The scarred man stood near the fire, watching the bodies burn. His face was unreadable. A soldier approached him, voice low. "We need to move. We're not the only ones out here." "Not the only ones?" A cold weight settled in my gut. The scarred man didn't respond right away. He just nodded, then turned toward the SUV. A moment later, the driver's side door opened. He slid in without a word, the vehicle rumbling to life beneath us. I leaned forward as far as the cuffs would let me. "Where are you taking me?" No answer. I clenched my jaw. I'm not infected. Still nothing. Outside, the firelight flickered against his face, casting deep shadows across his scarred skin. He gripped the wheel tighter, eyes locked on the road ahead. I exhaled sharply. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" His jaw tensed. That was it. That was all I needed to see. The soldiers, the cleanup crew, the headshots. This wasn't an outbreak. This was containment. The SUV rumbled forward, tires crunching over dirt and gravel. The forest blurred past in a mess of dark shapes, twisted branches clawing at the sky. I stared at the back of the driver's seat, my mind racing. I had spent the last 12 hours running for my life, running from monsters I didn't understand, but now I was in the hands of people who did understand them. And that scared me more. I leaned back, forcing my breathing to slow. My wrists ached, my muscles burned, but my mind was already working. These people were trained, armed, prepared, but they'd made a mistake. They hadn't killed me, and as long as I was alive, I still had a chance. I wasn't out of this yet, not by a long shot. The SUV rumbled down an empty highway, swallowed by the night. I sat in the back, wrists bound, mind racing. The scarred man hadn't spoken a word since we left the burning bodies behind. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, gaze locked on the road ahead. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew one thing. I wasn't getting out of this alive. Not unless I did something. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truths. Finally, I spoke. "You knew, didn't you?" His hands tightened slightly, but he said nothing. I leaned forward as far as the cuffs would let me. "This wasn't some random outbreak. You people knew it was coming." Still nothing. I pressed harder. "How long?" My voice was quiet but sharp. "How long have you been cleaning up messes like this?" The SUV kept rolling, eating up the miles. I was about to push again when he finally answered. "Long enough." His voice was flat, emotionless. I swallowed hard. I had expected a lie, deflection, but the way he said it, the weight in those two words, he wasn't hiding it. I exhaled slowly. "And me?" I asked. What happens when we get wherever we're going? Silence. And that told me everything. I wasn't making it out of this car alive. I leaned back, my heartbeat steady despite the cold truth sinking in. I had spent the last 12 hours running, fighting, barely surviving. I wasn't going to let it end like this. Not in the back of some black site government truck, executed and forgotten. I flexed my fingers, shifting my hands slightly against the cuffs. My wrists ached, the metal biting deep. But I wasn't focused on the pain. I was focused on the pistol. It was still in my waistband. They hadn't searched me. I kept my breath steady, forcing my body to stay loose. If I tensed up, he'd notice I needed to be fast, precise. One shot. That's all I had. My fingers found the grip of the pistol, slow and deliberate. My arms were pinned awkwardly, the cuffs making it nearly impossible to aim properly. I had no choice. I lunged forward. The scarred man reacted instantly. His instincts razor sharp. His hand shot toward his sidearm, but I was already moving. I jammed the barrel of the pistol against his ribs. Pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. For half a second, time froze. Then he struck. His elbow smashed into my face, blinding pain exploding across my skull. The world spun as I was thrown sideways against the door. I barely had time to recover before his hand clamped around my throat. The SUV swerved violently, tires shrieking. He drove one-handed, the other squeezing hard enough to make my vision blur. "You don't get it," he said, voice calm despite the chaos. "You think this is about you?" I clawed at his grip, gasping. "You think I care if you live or die?" His eyes flicked toward me, dark and unreadable. "You're nothing." The SUV slammed to a stop. I wheezed for air as he let go, throwing open his door. "We're here." My head swam. I blinked rapidly, forcing my vision to clear. Through the windshield I saw it. A facility. Huge. Silent. Hidden deep in the woods. The kind of place that didn't exist on any map. Fenced-off perimeters, guard towers, lights humming against the darkness. A private black site. And the closer I looked, the worse it got. Bodies. Not just bodies, people, some dead, some still moving. Locked behind reinforced glass, some weren't human anymore. I'd seen monsters in the woods, but whatever they were keeping in here, it was worse. Way worse. The back door swung open. The scarred man grabbed me, hauling me out onto unsteady legs. I wrenched away, coughing. "You can't contain this." I spat blood onto the pavement. "You know that." He didn't answer. I pushed harder. "You wouldn't have soldiers burning bodies in the woods if you were in control. You wouldn't be out here personally if everything was fine." I saw it then. A flicker. Not doubt, something else. Resignation. Like he already knew I was right. Something had gone wrong. And this place, this facility, was the last line of defense. I took a slow breath. "You're losing control." He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached for his radio. And that's when the alarms started blaring. A deafening klaxon split the air, red warning lights flashing against the trees. Inside the facility, figures moved, not soldiers, not scientists, the things they had locked up, the monsters. One of the guards shouted something into his radio, but I barely heard him. My eyes were locked on the reinforced glass of the holding cells. It was cracking. The scarred man stiffened. His head snapped toward the building, radio still in hand. Status. No response. A sickening screech of metal. The front gates buckled. The first body hit the ground, ripped apart in seconds. I saw the moment it clicked for him, the moment he realized this was it. He turned toward me, toward the SUV, toward escape, too late. The fence exploded outward as they swarmed through. I dove, hit the ground hard, rolled under the SUV just as the screams started. Gunfire erupted, useless. The soldiers were strong, trained, equipped. Didn't matter. Because these weren't the slow, shuffling creatures from the woods. These were faster. These were stronger. I watched through the chaos as the scarred man fought, his rifle kicking, his movements precise. But he already knew. He was losing. One of the creatures slammed into him. They went down in a tangle of limbs. I didn't stay to watch the ending. I rolled out from under the SUV, sprinting toward the tree line. No plan, no weapons, just raw survival. Behind me, the facility burned. The screams didn't last long. By the time I reached the road, the only sound left was the wind and the slow, distant shuffle of something still moving. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Because I had survived the first 12 hours of the outbreak. But now, the world was ending. And I was just another body running through the ashes. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.